Welcome back. Now, let's quickly get right into the SANDF story. Now, we're seeing that injuries among South African soldiers are increasing in the Democratic Republic of Congo's war-torn North Kivu region, with the loss of 14 soldiers in the Central African Republic early this year still fresh in the minds of South Africans. The country is involved in another war in the DRC. To unpack the changing security dynamics on the continent, we are joined on the line by Paul Simon Handy, Research Director of the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you so much, Paul Simon, for making the time to join us. Now, we've made mention of the fact that we still have the memory of the loss of 14 soldiers in the DRC earlier this year. But let's take a couple of steps back and help us understand, why is South Africa in the DRC? What are we standing to gain by participating in that fighting?
South Africa is in the DRC under the background of the UN Security Council resolution that allowed for the sending of an intervention brigade, which offensive powers. So that means that the current mission, the current UN mission in the DRC, the MONUSCO, the mission to stabilize the DRC, was actually augmented with this intervention brigade, to which South Africa is part. So South Africa is there as a member of the UN, as a member of the AU, and under the banner of this organization, and with a mandate of the UN Security Council. So it's perfectly legal, but it's also perfectly normal for a country like South Africa, with the capacities that this country has to stabilize an ailing SADC member.
I mean, there has been some questions on the normality that you speak about, Paul Simon, specifically around the allegation that the South African troops are protecting the mineral wealth of the DRC. Is there any truth that has come out of those allegations? And if so, what is the correlation that we're seeing between mineral wealth and increased military presence?
It's true that the DRC is an extremely rich country in terms of minerals, but remember that we shouldn't confuse South Africa's involvement in the DRC with other involvements elsewhere in the continent. So, and every country is perfectly justified in having economic and trade interest in any country, but it will be quite damaging to think that South Africa is part of this UN mission in the DRC just for the mineral wealth. But it's true that these considerations also play a role, definitely, and which is perfectly normal for the conduit of economic diplomacy.
When we look at the fact that there are other African countries involved, for example, there's the allegation that Rwanda is possibly backing the rebels. Does this mean that South Africa is potentially involved in a regional war? And if that is the case, what are the implications for South Africa's diplomatic relations with Rwanda?
South Africa is not there only in South Africa's name. South Africa is there under the UN name, and this is strongly supported by the AU. So in that sense, it won't be, should these conflicts deteriorate or degenerate, then it won't be South Africa only which is involved in a regional war, but rather the UN. So South Africa has the legitimacy to be involved there, and it is true that at the moment, South Africa's diplomatic relations with Rwanda are relatively tense because of the UN allegations pointing at Rwanda's responsibility in terms of destabilizing the eastern part of Congo. South Africa is strongly engaged there because it considers that the SADC member is under threat, and this SADC member needs the support of SADC members and beyond.
Now, Paul Simon, if we look at the fact that, for example, in the eastern part of the continent, we're seeing increasing discoveries of oil and gas, and it seems as if where there is mineral wealth, at some point this is always followed by some degree of conflict. Do you believe that there might be a correlation of, in the sense of seeing increased security movements towards areas where we're going to be seeing mineral wealth? Should Africa be bracing itself for potential increase in fighting because of the mineral resources that we're finding now?
mineral resources have generally been conflict-prone or prone to instability. Even rumors of mineral wealth can generate movements that can steer violence. That's true. But on the other side, the African continent has also made quite some substantial moves, some substantial progress in terms of managing and stabilizing areas that are prone to conflict. So these new discoveries actually are not just potentially destabilizing, but the wealth that comes from the exploitation of these minerals is also potentially a stabilizing factor. So in that sense, I'm not one of those pessimists who think that mineral wealth will necessarily equate or lead to instability. I think, on the contrary, that it will increasingly contribute to Africa's rising. But of course, there will be here and there some competition around these natural resources, and this competition will sometimes be violent, but it won't necessarily be the trend.
Paul Simon, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Of course, that was Paul Simon Handy, Research Director of the Institute for Security Studies.